Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. The text message glowed on my phone screen as the ambulance siren wailed. My daughter's small hand felt cold in mine, her breathing shallow from anaphylactic shock. The paramedic was busy inserting an IV while calmly explaining treatment protocols, but his words blurred together as I stared at those 7 words. 6 years of dedication. 6 years of being the first one in, last one out. 6 years of missed bedtimes and mommy has to work conversations with my little girl. All ended with a text while my child fought for breath beside me. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford that luxury. Not when Arya needed me present, not broken. So I tucked the phone away and squeezed her hand tighter. 4 hours earlier, I'd been putting final touches on the investment presentation I'd spent months preparing. Then the school called. Arya had accidentally eaten something with peanuts at lunch. By the time I grabbed my keys, my boss Owen was standing in my doorway. "You can't leave. Not today," he said, voice tight with barely contained anger. "My daughter is having an allergic reaction," I replied, already moving past him. He stepped into my path. "This presentation cannot be rescheduled. You know how hard we worked to get these investors in one room. Some choices aren't choices at all. I'll call from the ambulance. Someone else can present the slides," I said. His expression shifted then, something cold and calculating, replacing the urgency. "Fine, go." I should have recognized it for what it was. Not acceptance, but decision. The decision that I was expendable. What Owen never understood was that while he charmed investors with practiced smiles, I was the architect behind our success. My analysis had transformed failing initiatives into funded ventures. My strategies had produced the results that impressed investors. My late nights had built the foundation he stood upon to shine. The night before my termination, I'd noticed something troubling in our presentation materials. The impact reports showed impossible results, communities supposedly transformed by programs that were still in planning phases, success metrics for initiatives that hadn't even launched. I'd made notes to raise questions, assuming there had been a timeline mistake. It wasn't a mistake. Now, as the ambulance pulled into the emergency bay and doctors rushed to help my daughter, I pushed everything else from my mind. The betrayal would have to wait. My child couldn't. I spent that first night in a hospital chair, watching my daughter's breathing stabilize as medications reduced the swelling. By morning, I'd received an email requesting immediate return of company property. No severance. No explanation beyond termination for insubordination. The second day, while Arya colored in her hospital gown, my mind cleared enough to understand what had happened. Those impact reports weren't aspirational projections. They were fabrications, complete fiction, sold as accomplished facts to idealistic investors who thought they were changing the world. On the third day, as doctors prepared Arya's discharge papers, my phone began buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. I finally answered one. "Are you the creator of the community impact model?" asked an unfamiliar voice. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "I represent the social impact investors. There's something concerning we need to discuss about the communities we visited yesterday." My hand tightened around the phone. "You visited the communities?" "Yes, following the verification protocol in your reports." What Owen never realized was that I'd embedded something unique into every proposal I'd ever written, a verification pathway. Each claimed impact included an invitation for investors to visit specific locations and speak with named community contacts. I'd always included this as theoretical future validation, knowing my boss never read the fine print. The day of my scheduled presentation, multiple investors had decided to actually follow those prompts. They'd wanted to see firsthand the wonderful changes their money had created. What they found instead were untouched problems, community centers that didn't exist, training programs no one had heard of. When they contacted the people listed, actual community leaders I'd interviewed during my research, these individuals confirmed nothing had ever happened. I never planned this revelation. I didn't orchestrate a takedown. My work ethic simply included thoroughness my boss couldn't comprehend. My firing had merely accelerated the investors discovering the truth for themselves. Before I continue, I want to thank you for listening to my story so far. If anything I've shared resonates with you, please hit that like button. It helps others find these real experiences. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd be grateful if you would. There's much more to this journey, and your support means everything. I read every comment, so please share your thoughts below. Now, let me continue with what happened after that phone call. My name is Layla Warren, and until that text message, I was the senior impact analyst at one of the country's fastest-growing social investment firms. I joined when it was barely more than an ambitious idea, bringing my background in data science and passion for measurable community change. I'm methodical by nature, the type who creates spreadsheets for grocery shopping and keeps emergency supplies in every location. Being a single mother to a child with severe allergies only intensified this tendency. Every teacher, friend, and babysitter had detailed instructions and backup EpiPens. I'd mapped every hospital between our home, Aria's school, and my office. What I hadn't planned for was betrayal from the company I'd helped build. After bringing Aria home from the hospital, I tucked her into bed with her favorite stuffed giraffe. "Will you stay home tomorrow?" she asked sleepily. "Just for the morning," I told her, smoothing her hair. "Auntie Jen will come stay with you after lunch. Mommy has an important meeting." "About your work?" I hesitated. "About making things right." Once Aria fell asleep, I spent hours preparing, not with slides or charts, my tools for 6 years, but with truth. I gathered dates, notes, and meeting records where I'd raised concerns about reporting accuracy. I found original research showing actual community conditions versus reported successes. The next morning, after my friend arrived to watch Aria, I dressed in clothes that made me feel strong. No company badge hung around my neck as I entered the cafe where we'd agreed to meet. Just me, my integrity, and unwavering determination. 3 people waited at a corner table, 2 women and a man, all with the measured confidence of people who made decisions about millions of dollars daily. "Layla Warren?" The older woman stood and extended her hand. "I'm Grace Torres from Horizon Funds. This is Ben Mercer from Community First Foundation and Willow Adams from Beneficial Alliance." Each nodded as I shook their hands. "Thank you for meeting with us," Grace said once I'd sat down, "especially given your personal circumstances." "My daughter is doing better," I said. "Thank you for asking." Ben leaned forward. "We'll be direct. Yesterday, following the guidance in your impact reports, we visited 3 neighborhoods where your company claimed significant improvements. "And?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "And we found nothing," Grace said flatly. "No new youth center on Highland Street, no job training graduates in Oak Park, no improved housing in Bridgeview." "We spoke with the exact community contacts listed in your reports," Willow added. "They confirmed no programs had ever been implemented. Some hadn't heard from your company since initial interviews about community needs." I took a deep breath. I was fired 3 days ago, while riding in an ambulance with my daughter. I had noticed discrepancies in our reporting but hadn't yet confirmed what they meant. "Were you aware the data was falsified?" Ben asked, his tone carefully neutral. "No," I said firmly. "I designed an honest evaluation system. Between reports, someone was altering my findings dramatically." "Who?" Grace asked. "I have my suspicions, but no proof," I admitted. "What I do know is that our company has secured nearly $40 million in funding, based partly on these fabricated results." The 3 investors exchanged glances. "We represent about 40% of that investment," Willow said quietly, "and we've already contacted the other major funders." My stomach tightened. "What happens now?" "That," said Grace, "depends partly on you." As they explained their proposal, I realized this moment wasn't just about exposing fraud. It was about creating real change for communities that had been promised help but received only empty words. The investors weren't just pulling their funding, they were redirecting it, bypassing the corporate structure entirely to work directly with the communities, and they wanted me to guide this new approach. "Not as an employee," Ben clarified, "as an equal partner in designing and implementing actual solutions." "Why me?" I asked. "I worked there." "Because you built verification methods into systems you knew most people wouldn't check," Grace said. "That shows integrity. And because those community leaders we spoke with, they all asked about you specifically. They trusted you." For the first time since that ambulance ride, I felt something other than shock or grief. I felt hope. What I didn't know then was that Owen had already launched a desperate counteroffensive, one that would drag me into a battle more personal and vicious than I could have imagined. a battle that would test every principle I held dear and force me to decide what kind of example I wanted to set for my daughter. But that confrontation was still coming. First, I had communities to visit and trust to rebuild, and a little girl at home who needed to see that sometimes doing the right thing actually matters. The next morning, I called my friend Prisha, an employment attorney who'd been urging me to sue for wrongful termination. Forget the lawsuit, I told her. I have something better. Better than a settlement? She asked, concerned. Layla, you're a single mom with medical bills. I'm partnering with the investors. We're building a direct funding model that bypasses middleman firms entirely. Her pause spoke volumes. Owen won't take that lying down. He's already telling people you failed to show for a critical presentation. Let him, I said with more confidence than I felt. The truth will stand. I spent the next week meeting with community leaders, apologizing for promises broken and explaining our new approach. Most were skeptical at first. They'd heard grand plans before. But when Grace transferred initial funds directly to community-managed accounts, without complex applications or corporate oversight, attitudes shifted. This isn't charity, I explained to Andre, who led youth programs in Highland. It's partnership. You know what your neighborhood needs better than any analyst. And what happens when these investors get bored? He challenged. That's why we're building sustainable programs with measurable outcomes, I replied, but real ones, not fabricated reports. He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. Then, let's get to work. While Arya recovered at home, I brought my laptop to the kitchen table instead of leaving for an office. She colored beside me as I designed transparent tracking systems for each community initiative. What are those circles? She asked, pointing to my screen. Those show how many families have food this week because of the project. She considered this seriously. But they need food every week. Exactly, I said. That's what we're working on. By the second week, Owen's counteroffensive began. Former colleagues called with warnings that he was spreading rumors, claiming I'd stolen proprietary information, sabotaged presentations, even fabricated the verification protocols to undermine the company after being passed over for promotion. Then came the cease and desist letter, claiming my community work violated non-compete clauses and confidentiality agreements. They're desperate, Grace reassured me. Our legal team says this has no merit. But the campaign escalated. Owen contacted every community partner, warning them that working with me could jeopardize future funding. He reached out to other investment groups, painting me as vengeful and unstable. Tell me honestly, I said to Ben during our weekly meeting. Is this hurting the work? It's not helping, he admitted. Some potential partners are getting cold feet. They worry about getting caught in corporate crossfire. I went home that night, feeling defeated. Arya noticed immediately. Why are you sad, Mommy? I considered sheltering her from adult problems, but remembered how my own mother's vague reassurances had only increased my childhood anxiety. Sometimes when people do wrong things, they try very hard to make others look bad so no one notices what they did. She absorbed this with the clear-eyed wisdom of 7-year-olds. Like when Tommy broke the classroom fish tank but told everyone I did it? Exactly like that. But Miss Kim had a camera that showed the truth, she said triumphantly. I kissed her forehead. Sometimes grown-ups forget to look for cameras. That night, after Arya was asleep, I stared at my ceiling wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. I could have taken severance, found another job, and maintained financial security for my daughter. Instead, I'd chosen principles over practicality. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Turn on Channel 8 now. The news was covering a scandal at a major social investment firm being investigated for investor fraud. The company wasn't named, but I recognized Owen standing beside his car, ignoring reporters' questions. The next morning, 3 more investors called me. We've been hearing concerning allegations about your firm's community impact reporting, said a man who introduced himself as Tripp from Wellspring Initiative. We're conducting our own investigation, but a colleague suggested we speak with you directly. By week's end, 7 more investment groups had pulled funding from my former company, but Owen wasn't finished fighting. On Monday, I received another text. We should talk about Arya's future. My blood ran cold. Owen had never met my daughter, never asked about her during 6 years of working together. That he would invoke her name now felt like a thinly veiled threat. I showed the message to Prisha, who advised documenting everything. This is crossing into potential harassment, she warned. 2 days later, I learned what Owen had really been planning. Willow called in a panic. Have you seen the proposal they just sent to regional partners? No, I replied. What proposal? They've created a new community initiative called Project Aria. It's exactly what we've been building, down to the direct funding model and community partnership structure. I felt physically ill. They've stolen our entire framework? Yes, but branded it as their original concept, claiming they've been developing it for years. They're approaching the same community leaders, offering identical support, but with their company logo. The most devastating part wasn't the theft of ideas, it was the calculated use of my daughter's name. Owen knew exactly what he was doing, taunting me with the knowledge that he could not only steal my work, but appropriate something deeply personal. I called an emergency meeting with our investor partners. We can fight this legally, Ben suggested. That could take years, Grace countered. Communities need help now. What if we go public? Asked Willow. Tell the media the whole story. I shook my head. Then, communities become collateral damage in a corporate feud. They deserve better. The room fell silent until I finally spoke again. I need to see the complete Project Aria proposal. Willow slid her tablet across the table. As I scrolled through the document, I noticed something extraordinary, something that made me sit up straighter. Owen had indeed copied our framework meticulously, but in his haste, he'd also copied my embedded verification protocols, the very system that had exposed his previous fraud. Even more significantly, he'd committed to specific outcome metrics by specific dates. He's promising impossible timelines, I said, almost laughing. Look, 50% employment increases in 3 months. Housing solutions for 200 families by quarter's end. Those numbers aren't achievable that quickly, Ben said, frowning. Not even with unlimited funding. Exactly, I replied. He's setting himself up to fail, spectacularly and publicly. But he'll blame implementation problems, Grace argued. He'll find scapegoats. Not if we help these communities succeed instead, I said quietly. The others looked confused. I don't want to compete with Project Aria, I explained. I want to ensure the communities it targets receive actual help from us, working quietly alongside local leaders, without corporate branding or press releases. You want to do the work without taking credit, Willow said slowly. I want these neighborhoods to succeed, regardless of who gets credit. I corrected. When Owen fails to deliver his impossible promises, these communities won't be abandoned, because we'll already be there, doing real work. That's not revenge, Ben said. That's redemption. For the communities, yes, I agreed. But there's one more piece. I explained my plan, not to expose Owen publicly myself, but to ensure that when his failure became evident, the contrast between promises and reality would be undeniable. We would document everything meticulously, not for publicity but for accountability. As we finalized our approach, my phone buzzed with a school alert. Aria's class was being sent home due to a power outage. I gathered my notes quickly. I have to get my daughter. We've got this, Grace assured me. Family first. As I drove to Aria's school, my mind kept returning to Owen's text about Aria's future. The implied threat still chilled me, but somehow the fear had transformed into something else. Determination. I wouldn't let him turn my daughter's name into a corporate branding exercise destined to fail. Instead, I would ensure that anything bearing her name helped people genuinely and lastingly. When I arrived at school, Aria ran to me with a drawing clutched in her hand. Look what I made in art class. It showed 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing beside what looked like garden plants with people gathered around. It's us at the community garden, she explained proudly, where you help people grow food. I hugged her tightly, suddenly understanding what true success looked like. Not investor percentages or professional recognition, but showing my daughter that making things better was always possible. What I couldn't have anticipated was how quickly Owen's house of cards would begin collapsing, or that the catalyst would come from a completely unexpected direction. The major investor call scheduled for the following week would change everything, revealing the true extent of what had been happening behind closed doors. And it would force me to make the hardest decision yet, one that would determine not just my professional future, but how I would teach my daughter about justice in an unjust world. As we drove home, Aria chattering about her day, I couldn't know that in 72 hours, the power dynamics would completely reverse. that the predator would become prey, that the lessons I'd never wanted to teach my daughter about corporate ruthlessness would instead become a lesson about standing firm in your truth, no matter how powerful your opponents. 3 days later, I sat in Grace's office, listening through the speakerphone as Owen's voice filled the room. This was the major investor call, where he planned to officially launch Project Aria. Grace had arranged for me to listen silently. Our commitment has always been to direct community support, Owen was saying, his voice smooth with practiced sincerity. Project Aria represents the culmination of years of planning. I clenched my fists, biting back words as he outlined his approach to community partnership, the exact model I'd spent years developing. "You're claiming these community partnerships are established?" asked an investor I didn't recognize. "Absolutely," Owen replied confidently. "We've been working with these neighborhood leaders for years. They're fully committed to our approach." I raised my eyebrows at Grace. This was a blatant lie. The community leaders had only received his proposals last week. "That's interesting," came another voice. "Because I've spent the morning touring Highland District with Andre Thompson, who says your company only contacted him 8 days ago." A heavy silence fell. "Andre is understandably protective of his relationship with us," Owen finally responded. "We respect his discretion with outside parties." "I'm not an outside party, Mr. Bryant," the voice continued. "I'm Tao Lin, chairperson of the Regional Development Authority. Andre has been my colleague for 15 years. I covered my mouth to keep from gasping. The RDA controlled municipal funding streams worth hundreds of millions. "Of course, Mr. Lin," Owen backpedaled quickly. "I meant no disrespect. Let me be direct," Lin continued. "We've spoken with leaders in all 5 neighborhoods targeted by Project Aria. None confirm long-term relationships with your firm. Several expressed concerns about your aggressive timeline and whether you would maintain support if early metrics weren't met. The tension could be felt even through the phone line. Moreover," Lin added, "we've uncovered concerning patterns in your previous reporting. Communities listed as transformed by your initiatives report no contact beyond initial assessments. This pattern spans 4 years." Grace muted the call momentarily. "This is unexpected. Lin wasn't scheduled to be on this call. What happens now?" She unmuted as Owen was speaking, his voice noticeably strained. "Regrettable miscommunication. Our on-the-ground team has clearly failed to maintain proper documentation of our community engagement." "Mr. Bryant," interrupted another voice, "this isn't about documentation. The Beneficial Alliance has independent verification that programs reported as successful simply don't exist." "Who authorized this investigation?" Owen demanded, his composure cracking. "I did," said Willow calmly, "after visiting 3 neighborhoods personally." "Your former employee raised legitimate concerns," added another investor. "We've since discovered at least 17 instances where impact data appears to have been falsified." "Our former employee?" Owen laughed harshly. "You mean Layla Warren? The woman who abandoned a critical presentation to deal with a minor family issue? Who violated her contractual obligations by taking proprietary information?" I stiffened at the dismissal of my daughter's emergency as minor. "A woman whose child was experiencing anaphylactic shock," Lin said coldly. "I reviewed the medical records myself. That you would terminate someone's employment via text message while they were in an ambulance speaks volumes about your company's values." "Medical?" Owen sputtered. "How did you obtain private medical records?" "My wife is the emergency physician who treated Aria Warren," Lin replied. "When she heard this child's mother had been fired while in our emergency department, she was disturbed enough to mention it. I recognized the name from community partners who spoke highly of Miss Warren's integrity." Grace squeezed my shoulder as I sat frozen in disbelief. "This call was supposed to be about Project Aria's launch," Owen said tightly. "No, Mr. Bryant," Lin corrected. "This call is about accountability. The Regional Development Authority is suspending consideration of all funding requests from your firm pending a complete audit. I've recommended our partner organizations do the same." One by one, investors voiced similar positions. Within 15 minutes, Owen's funding streams had effectively evaporated. As the call ended, Grace turned to me. "I didn't know about Lin's connection," she said. "This changes everything." My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This isn't over." "Oh," I showed Grace, who frowned. "Document it. This is becoming harassment." That evening, as I tucked Aria into bed, my phone rang with Owen's number. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Don't hang up, he said quickly. Please, I need 5 minutes. I'm listening. I stepped into the hallway, closing Arya's door. I'm willing to publicly acknowledge your contributions, he offered. Reinstate your position with a significant promotion and compensation package. Why would you do that? Because the investors respect you, he said bluntly. And right now, I need their confidence. So this isn't about recognizing my work. It's about using me to salvage your reputation. It's business, Layla. Nothing personal. I nearly laughed. Firing me while my daughter was having a medical emergency felt pretty personal. It's pretty personal. A regrettable decision made under pressure, he conceded. One I'd like to correct. By naming your stolen project after my child, was that also business? His pause told me everything. I'm not coming back, Owen. Not for any title or salary. Then what do you want? He asked, frustration evident. Revenge? You've already cost us millions in funding. Isn't that enough? This was never about revenge, I said quietly. It was about doing right by communities that were promised help. It was about honesty. Noble sentiments don't pay mortgages, he snapped. You're raising a child alone. Be practical. I am being practical. I'm teaching my daughter that integrity matters more than expediency. She can't eat integrity, he said coldly. My daughter is not your concern, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger rising within me. Neither is my financial situation. Fine. Enjoy your moral high ground while it lasts, he said. But remember, I built this company from nothing once. I can do it again. You've made an enemy you can't afford. After he hung up, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The threat lingered in the air, but somehow its power had diminished. Owen's empire was crumbling, built as it was on fabrications. Mine, whatever it would become, would have a stronger foundation. The following Monday, I met with Grace, Ben, Willow, and surprisingly, Tao Lin. The authority is redirecting developmental funds, Lin explained. We need partners with demonstrated integrity and community understanding. Like you, Grace added. They proposed creating an independent community development organization with transparent governance and direct accountability to the neighborhoods served. They wanted me to lead it. This isn't about replacing one middleman with another, Lin clarified. It's about building something fundamentally different. What about Owen? I asked. He's already threatened me. He'll see this as declaration of war. Mr. Bryant has more immediate concerns, Lin said diplomatically. The audit has uncovered financial irregularities beyond misreporting. Regulatory agencies are now involved. 2 weeks later, the business section of the local paper ran a small article about an investment firm under investigation for fraud. Owen's name appeared halfway through. No charges had been filed, but 3 executives had resigned. I didn't feel the satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness, quickly filled by the urgency of real work. The communities didn't care about corporate drama. They needed functional programs. 6 months passed in a blur of activity. Our new organization, simply called Community Partners, established workspace in a previously vacant building in Highland. I hired a small team, including 2 people from my former company who had contacted me privately, disgusted by what they'd witnessed. One rainy Tuesday, I looked up from my desk to find Owen standing in my office doorway. He looked thinner, his expensive suit replaced by casual clothes. Can I come in? He asked, uncharacteristically tentative. I nodded, curious rather than afraid. I signed a settlement agreement yesterday, he said, sitting across from me. No criminal charges, but significant financial penalties. The company will be dissolved. I'm sorry, I said, realizing I meant it. Creating something and watching it collapse was painful, regardless of circumstances. Are you? He studied me. I thought you'd be celebrating. For one, I never wanted destruction. I wanted accountability. Well, you got both, he sighed heavily. I'm leaving town. Fresh start somewhere. My reputation hasn't preceded me. What will you do? Consulting, probably. Reconsider priorities. He met my eyes directly. I came to apologize. Firing you that way was unconscionable, regardless of our professional disagreements. The apology surprised me more than his appearance. Thank you, I said simply. Your new organization seems to be thriving, he observed, glancing around my modest office. We're doing real work. It's harder than fabricating results, but more satisfying. He actually smiled at that. I imagine so. After he left, I sat quietly, processing the encounter. The anticipated showdown had instead been a muted recognition of consequences. No dramatic confrontation, just the quiet reckoning that follows poor choices. That evening, Arya and I visited the community garden her drawing had depicted months earlier. Now actually built, it buzzed with activity, families harvesting vegetables, teenagers learning about sustainable growing practices, elderly residents sharing traditional recipes. Remember when you asked if people would have food every week? I asked her, watching children fill baskets with tomatoes. She nodded, sampling a freshly picked strawberry. Look around, I said. This is what happens when people work together honestly. Did the bad man who fired you help build this? She asked. I considered how to answer. No, but in a strange way, his actions led to something better than what existed before. Like when the caterpillar turns into a butterfly? She suggested. Something like that. I agreed. A community elder called Arya over to show her how to identify ripe eggplants. Watching her absorb the lesson intently, I reflected on our journey. The text message that had devastated me in that ambulance had ultimately opened a door to more meaningful work. The corporate structure that had seemed so important had been revealed as fragile, while the community connections proved resilient. I hadn't sought revenge, but justice had found its way regardless, not through my orchestration, but through the natural consequences of choices made. Owen had built his success on falsified results, while I had embedded verification into everything I created. When tested, only one approach remained standing. As the garden lights came on against the darkening sky, I joined Arya among the plants. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, funding to secure, programs to evaluate, communities to serve. But tonight, watching my daughter's hands in the earth, I knew we had built something real, something that could be verified by anyone who cared enough to look. Thank you so much for staying with me through this journey. If my story resonated with you in any way, please hit the like button. It truly helps others find these real experiences. I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to hear more stories of corporate accountability and authentic change. Your comments mean the world to me. I'd love to know if you've ever had to choose between security and integrity in your own career. Until next time, remember that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations.